the last book that I wrote, The 101 Biggest Mistakes Nonprofits Make and How You Can Avoid Them. I wrote that book after sitting down with somewhere between 70 and 80 nonprofit leaders. And in each of those conversations, I was called in initially because they said some version of, hey, we've got this fundraising issue or this challenge or this revenue problem. And after having discussion with them, more than 90% of those ended up not being a true fundraising problem. It wasn't a lack of donors. It wasn't a lack of resources. It wasn't a lack of money. It was a leadership problem that was just manifesting in their fundraising results. And so it was the impetus for writing that book. And as I thought more about it, and as I continue to think about that, really almost every challenge we face in the sector ultimately comes down to leadership. While giving has been relatively flat for like the last 40 years compared to, at least in the States, compared to GDP, it's not like there's a massive lack of resources. There's no lack of capital. With a good cause and a strong case for support, organizations can raise money, right? But in many cases, poor leadership pushes them out of the equation, causes all sorts of internal conflict, causes conflict with donors and supporters, and keeps organizations from being able to actually raise the revenue they need. But it rarely, in my experience, comes down to an actual fundraising problem. The first one that I would say is funny. I've had this conversation with several of our partners and clients over time. When a leader starts every conversation with someone in the organization with the phrase, no, we can't do that because, right? And I actually had this one, Mel Trotter Ministries in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They've been a longtime client and good friend of ours. And Dennis Van Kampen, their CEO, he'll say, well, what do we have to change in order to do this? I just love that reframe of it because then it makes like every option available to you, right? Because you can change all sorts of things in order to be able to do whatever it is that someone's proposing. But when your first answer is no, you just shut the conversation down, right? So that I think is one big one. Another significant challenge we see is there are a lot of C-suite leaders that don't have the same understanding of reality as their staff. In fact, we're actually about to publish some research where we looked at this and we wanted to know, how do CEOs and C-suite leaders see their organizations and their capabilities, and even personally, like their own traits, and how do their frontline staff view it? And there's a strong disconnect between those two perspectives, where C-level executives overestimate their own capabilities, they overestimate the successful traits that they have, and their staff see it completely differently, right? And we see the same thing on fundraising, where a CEO believes that their fundraising operation and engine is really strong, and their staff are sitting there going, no, there's actually a lot of things that need to get fixed. So I think not having a real understanding or a willingness to accept reality, and instead trying to always put on a bold face, trying to always have a positive perspective, when sometimes you just need to say, yeah, this is broken and we've got to fix it, right? That's another big one. One of the other ones that we see quite often is the fact that many C-suite leaders are conflict averse. And so instead of dealing particularly with something like a toxic employee, someone who's behaving poorly, who's treating others on the team poorly, who's maybe treating supporters poorly, and oftentimes this could be a board member, it could be another C-level executive, it could be a frontline fundraiser or a program officer. When you're unwilling to deal directly with bad behavior, it does two things. One, it chases your best people out the door really quickly. And two, it sets the new tone for what's acceptable in the organization. And so we often see that begin to kind of, work its way through an organization, almost like a cancer, and cause all sorts of different conflicts down the line because a C-level executive or a director is unwilling to say to someone, hey, you just can't behave that way. And if you're going to continue to behave that way, we need to work on an exit plan. Those are some of the big ones. I think there are others. I talk to fundraisers all the time who say some variation of, well, I didn't have a hand in creating my budget. I don't know anything about our strategic plan. I don't get to talk to the board. All of those things, which I think are often, a CEO or an executive director holds a lot of that closely held for any number of reasons. But my perspective on that is the more sunlight we can bring to those processes, the more people that can speak into them, the higher the likelihood that our people are going to take ownership of the work and actually have a clear understanding of what's necessary in order to be successful. And the other thing is, if you sit a fundraiser in a planning meeting and you've got these grand plans, let's say organizationally you want to raise or you want to spend $5 million, your fundraiser is going to be able to say, we've got $3 million of capacity in our file. what are we going to do differently to get the next two, right? Whereas unfortunately, what often happens is all of that gets decided, and then someone comes to the fundraiser and says, hey, I know last year we raised 3 million, but this year we need 5, go figure it out. But not only does it create a disconnect in the organization, but basically it forces your fundraisers into this unwinnable challenge. And I think that's a lot of why people get disillusioned and leave the sector quickly.